The issues and opinions presented on this program are for informational and entertainment purposes only. They do not reflect the views of NLB nor its employees.
Covering every corner of the globe, this is From Washington al Mundo with Mauricio Claver-Carone, your source for foreign policy and international affairs.
Welcome to From Washington al Mundo. I'm your host, Mauricio Claver-Carone. For all of you who listen to this show regularly, you'll know the name Alan Gross. Alan Gross is an American development worker who was imprisoned in Cuba, was given a 15-year prison sentence. His crime, per se, was helping the Jewish community on the island connect to the internet. This week, I wrote a column, an editorial in the Wall Street Journal. It was called Cuba's American Hostage, about Alan Gross. And it's something that all Americans should know about. It's a horrible situation, and I'm very pleased and honored that his wife, Judy Gross, who just returned from Cuba to seeing Alan Gross, is joining us online to discuss her most recent visit and what all of us can do to raise awareness about the cause of Alan Gross. Judy, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Mauricio.
Now, you just returned from a long-awaited trip to see your husband, who is in a Cuban prison. How did you find him? How is he doing?
Well, I found him physically it was very disturbing. His bones are sticking out. He looks like a concentration camp victim. He does have very bad pain in his hips and various lumps and bumps and things that we don't really know what they are. But, Alan's spirit is still strong. He's a strong personality, and thank God that he can continue to keep that strength, and that's a positive.
I saw in a statement that you put out that you said that you fear that he's not going to survive this. Is it physically? I mean, psychologically, is he strong? Is he in good shape?
My fear is physically. He does have a few other ailments, and I think that eventually he is going to kind of lose his will and lose his hope to continue to survive. And he kind of made hints at that he was saying, I won't make it. He actually said, I won't make it 3 more years here.
And I should have mentioned in the prelude that he was arrested in December of 2009. So it's been over 2.5 years, and we're now approximately getting to the 3-year mark, tragically. And the sentence is for 15 years. I obviously, Alan is going through the toughest part, but you and your family, how are you holding up?
It's so hard to answer that question. I do what I have to do. I don't have any choice. I wake up in the morning. My first thought in the morning is Alan, and my first thought when I go to bed is Alan and my family, and trying to keep everyone together. So there's always a heaviness, but I continue to do what I have to do, which is go to work and work for Alan's release.
Let me kind of take a step back and kind of go from the beginning about who your husband is and his professional background. Can you tell us a little bit about Alan as a person and as a professional, as a development professional?
Sure. Alan, by degree, is actually a social worker, and the type of social work he is what we call a community organizer and group organizer. That's his personality. Alan can make friends with anybody. He can take and get them to agree about things. And he has just a great love for helping people. And this is seen throughout his career, working in many African countries, working a lot in the Middle East and Palestine, just bringing people together, helping them as much as he can. He always was a fighter for the underdog.
And what was Alan doing on this particular occasion in Cuba? This was not his first trip to Cuba.
No, it wasn't. He was working on a contract to help the Jewish community improve their intranet access. There are three main Jewish communities on the island. They're all spread out. So he was distributing laptops, cell phones, so they could connect with each other on the intranet, share recipes, share news stories, and also connect to the outside world. At his trial, one man was crying about how he saw the Western Wall for the first time. So he was helping them to improve their lives and improve access so they could download prayer books and things that they desperately need in the community.
And this is something that, as you mentioned, he had been throughout the world and had worked in Africa and other countries. This is something he's done in other countries throughout the world, correct?
It's one of the things he's done. I mean, he's worked with governments to help privatize. He works as an economic consultant, but he also has worked in countries doing this kind of technical work.
And of course, only in Cuba would this be considered something that the government does not like, because communication across borders, across frontiers, is actually something that's protected under the Universal Declaration of Human Rights.
Absolutely.
What was your reaction when you learned that, well, obviously when he was first arrested, but then that he was being charged with quote-unquote undermining the territorial sovereignty and integrity of Cuba?
Honestly, I thought that was a sham, an unfortunate, not funny joke. Alan is the last person in the world who would want to do something like that. I mean, he's an old peacenik. He has never wanted to interfere with any government and how they operate. He works with governments, but Alan loves the Cuban people, and he just would not do anything to interfere with the laws of Cuba.
Did you feel at the beginning, in the early months of 2010, that this was going to be something, or were you led to believe that this was going to be only temporary, as opposed to this tragic, now almost 3 years that we're going to?
I think the first few months, I thought that any time that the Cubans would agree to send him home. After a few months, then it became obvious that this was a lot more serious than we thought, and it took the Cubans a year to actually even charge him. So he sat in prison for 1 year without charges.
I know that Alan has a very close relationship with his mother, who is 90 years old and has terminal lung cancer. We saw that the United States allowed René González, who was charged here in the United States for espionage activities, to travel to Cuba to visit his dying brother and then return to the United States to complete his sentence. Why do you think the Cuban government isn't showing the same type of compassion towards your husband?
I wish I could answer that. I really do. I would have, and I was expecting them to show that compassion that the U.S. showed in allowing René to go back to Cuba. I don't have an answer to that. I would love to know the reason.
Tell me a little bit more about the recent filing that your lawyer has made to the United Nations on Alan's behalf.
Yes, there is on file. It's in a certain part of the United Nations that hears different international complaints, so to speak. And so my attorney has filed that what Cuba is doing is against international law, and hoping that the UN will agree with that. Certainly not a binding kind of arbitration, but we're certainly hoping that other countries will pick up on this and put some pressure on Cuba.
And the good news, I think that the UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detentions has had success in the past and is somewhat independent of some of the bureaucracy of the United Nations that we've all come to learn about. And it's independent legal professionals that can actually look at this and see the clear violations of law. So we all remain hopeful that this will bring more international attention and pressure upon the Cuban government. Do you think the United States government and the administration is doing enough to secure your husband's release?
I actually desperately need the U.S. government to do more. The U.S. government sent Alan on this project to Cuba. I need them to work harder to bring him home. If they don't press for Alan's freedom and sit down and talk to President Castro, he's not going to come home. And I know that there are a lot of people who have doubt of Castro's intentions. But regardless of the intentions, we need to try as much as we can to sit down and negotiate. A couple months ago, maybe 6 weeks or 2 months ago, Cuba put out some message as saying that they would be happy to sit down with the United States. The U.S., because they had so much doubt in Castro's intentions, decided that they wouldn't do that. And I need them to they have a moral obligation to try as hard as they can.
We saw that in January 2011, the now Assistant Secretary of State for the Western Hemisphere, Roberta Jacobson, she was at the time the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of State, traveled to Havana under kind of the guise of the migration talks,
right,
in order to discuss this issue with the Cuban government. Did not get very far. I think I agree with you in the sense that they should continue to press the Cuban government on this issue. However, weeks after, they unilaterally went off and eased some sanctions. Did you think that was a little bit premature, not having been successful just the weeks before on those talks?
You know, I'm not an expert in all the politics and what the government does. My priority right now is to just bring Alan home, and I don't know whether that would help, that helped or would hurt. I just don't know about that.
That makes sense. We know that there are foreign press bureaus in Havana. There's the Associated Press, Reuters,
right.
CNN has a bureau, and others. Do you think that they are doing enough in regularly reporting and keeping us updated of what is of Alan's well-being? Because they're there and they seem to report on a lot of frivolous things that are taking place on the island. So it would seem that they could really be stepping it up here.
Well, here's my theory about that, and that is that I think if Reuters and some of the other wire services tried to get in to see Alan, there's a chance that the Cuban government might kind of have them leave the country. And I think, and I'm not an expert, this is just a guess on my part, but I think that that's one thing that's keeping them from going in to interview Alan.
Yeah. What would you, and we've actually had the experience, and I'll say it on air, we've had the experience when kind of Cuban government elite and bureaucrats, satellite radio is beamed into Cuba, as it is throughout North America, and you see it. They have responded, and people are listening on the island, and obviously it's the privileged ones that have it because the Cuban people are not allowed to. Now, if you had an opportunity to tell Raul Castro directly and speak to him directly, what would you say to him?
That's an easy one. Send Alan home. But I would also say Alan had no intention of breaking any kind of laws. He has no intention of interfering with the government. He doesn't get into that. And it's not serving any purpose to keep him there. And I'd also ask him on a humanitarian basis to please think of his mother. And I mean, Alan, this is somebody who talked to his mother twice a day. I mean, that's unheard of for a lot of people. But they spoke twice a day, and he's very close to her, and he's just so distraught about it.
I can't even imagine. I can't imagine because this is something that, and the case here is that of an American, and as Americans, we all need to, and definitely there's an obligation of the United States government, him being a worker and part of a program of the United States government. But this is something that happens to the Cuban people every day opposition activists and people are going through this, which breaks all of our hearts. What can all of us do? I mean, just regular people who are listening here in the United States, who are outraged by what is taking place. What can we all do to help Alan Gross?
I think the best thing is to contact your congressmen, your senators. Right now, we're asking senators to sign a letter to send to Raul Castro. I would suggest that everybody call their senator and urge them to sign that letter. I would ask that people send messages to the White House and ask them to press on this issue and not leave Alan out in the field, so to speak. I think those are the best things that we can do right now.
And if I may add one note, we see a lot of, I mean, obviously, and that was a policy thing that we spoke about in January 2011. One of those things that they did was allowing these people-to-people tours. At the very least, I think there should be a mandatory class of everybody that goes to travel to these tours of Cuba, of who Alan Gross is and what is taking place, so that they can mention it to the Cuban government officials that they see on the island. And everyone that goes to the island, every government official, everybody that goes to travel there should press the Cuban government on this issue, because it is something that affects us all and all of us Americans should know about. Judy, our thoughts and prayers are with you, your family, and definitely with Alan. Thank you so much for taking the time, and thank you so much for your strength.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mauricio.
Appreciate it.
From Washington al Mundo es una producción de National Latino Broadcasting.